Okay, now we're going to put these things together. So if you remember last week we talked about social institutions. Social institutions are those enduring, powerful, strong ways of organizing society, such as the education system, the family, and so forth. So institutional oppression is the phrase we use when institutions as a whole engage in oppression. As we talked about last week, institutions tend to keep the same people in power that are in power because it's those people who run those institutions, who are empowering those institutions, that pick what qualities, what types of people succeed in the future, right? The people doing the hiring are the CEOs, are the people who run the companies, right? And they tend to hire people that meet their values, that are the type of people they think should be in power, that are more likely to be like them. And we can see this throughout all different types of social institutions. And so over time, the same groups of people tend to become powerful and stay in power in institutions, and this leads to what we call institutional oppression. We also talked last week about the social structure. That's just the term for all of the social institutions put together. And so that leads us to structural oppression. This is where we have oppression that exists all across the social structure, across all social institutions. And so as each institution works together, that tends to reinforce and make stronger those oppressions. And if you think about the way that, for example, if you have trouble doing well in school because there is oppression within the school system, that's also going to mean you have trouble getting a job, you're less likely to get wealth. That's also going to mean you're more likely to be targeted by and have problems with the legal system, with the judicial system, and so all of that adds up to structural oppression. So what is oppression, which is the term we're just going to use here for structural oppression? It's when you have discrimination, so acts that harm particular individuals because of prejudice or bias, happening across the system wide against entire groups. It exists within the context of social structures. So when we're talking about oppression, we're not talking about what's going on in a small room. We're talking about societies as a whole. And it requires structural oppression. You cannot oppress people unless you have that structural power, unless you're the people in charge. So unlike all the previous cases, oppression only goes in one direction, right? So anyone can have stereotypes about anyone else, anyone can have biases or prejudices against anyone else, and even anyone can potentially discriminate against anyone else. For example, people might have localized power, right? So a group of gay people might run a business where they discriminate against straight people who are trying to get jobs there, and they have that power within the context of that business to engage in that discrimination. But because oppression requires control of the social structure as a whole, that only belongs to particular groups, and it only goes in that direction. When we're talking about oppression, we're not talking about individuals, we're talking about what happens to groups, and so there's a lot of variety still within the groups in terms of their outcomes, but the group as a whole experiences oppression.